The social worker had driven these mountain roads for 3 months, visiting families that the state deemed at risk because they chose isolation over civilization. Lily Carter gripped the steering wheel tighter as her government-issued sedan struggled up the winding dirt path toward Copper Mountain. She had filed reports on hermits, off-grid preppers, and families who homeschooled their children in cabins without running water. In every case, she had maintained her professional composure, checking boxes on forms that would determine whether children stayed with their families or entered the foster care system. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But nothing had prepared her for Jack Brennan. The man standing in his cabin doorway looked like he could wrestle bears, with his bare hands and win. 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle, weathered skin that spoke of decades under the mountain sun, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His dark hair was longer than any man she had encountered in Pine Ridge, tied back with what looked like a leather cord. Everything about him screamed danger, from the way he filled the doorframe to the hunting knife that hung casually at his belt. Most unsettling of all was his absolute stillness. While other parents had blustered, argued, or pleaded when she arrived for her inspections, Jack Brennan simply stood there, watching her with the patience of a predator waiting for prey to make the first move. His hands, scarred and calloused from years of mountain living, hung relaxed at his sides. Not once in 37 years had Lily Carter seen a man who looked less likely to shed a tear. The morning mist clung to Copper Mountain like a shroud. When Lily Carter first made the drive up to check on what her supervisor called the Brennan situation, her clipboard held a thin file containing more questions than answers about the widowed father who had pulled his 7-year-old daughter out of Pine Ridge Elementary 6 months earlier. The school district had flagged the case, citing concerns about a child's welfare when removed from structured education to live in complete isolation. Lily had expected to find the typical mountain recluse scenario, a bitter man raising a neglected child in squalor, using homeschooling as an excuse to avoid scrutiny. The state of Colorado took these cases seriously, especially after several high-profile incidents where isolated children had suffered abuse that went undetected for years. Her job was straightforward: assess the living conditions, evaluate the child's welfare, and determine whether intervention was necessary. The dirt road wound through stands of aspen and pine, climbing steadily toward the tree line. Her sedan was never meant for this terrain, but Lily had learned to navigate challenging mountain paths during her first 3 months serving the rural communities outside Pine Ridge. Each family presented its own unique challenges, but most shared common threads: financial hardship, distrust of government authority, and a fierce independence that sometimes came at the expense of their children's well-being. According to her file, Jack Brennan had purchased the remote property with cash 7 years earlier, just before his wife died in a car accident down in Denver. He had been raising his daughter Emma alone ever since, with minimal contact with the outside world. The girl had attended Pine Ridge Elementary as a kindergartner and first grader, riding the bus down the mountain each day like any normal child. But something had changed this past spring. Brennan had withdrawn Emma from school, citing his intention to homeschool her on the mountain. The school principal, Mrs. Henderson, had painted a troubling picture during Lily's preliminary research. Emma Brennan had been a bright, curious child who excelled in reading and showed remarkable artistic talent. She was well-liked by her classmates and teachers, showing no signs of the social difficulties often seen in children from isolated backgrounds. Her sudden removal from school had surprised everyone, particularly because it came just 3 weeks before the end of the academic year. More concerning were the whispers from townspeople about Jack Brennan himself. The man rarely came to town, and when he did, he spoke to no one beyond the bare minimum required to purchase supplies. Frank Morrison, who owned the general store, described him as polite but distant, paying for everything in cash and never lingering for the casual conversations that formed the backbone of small-town social life. Some residents found his isolation suspicious, wondering what a man might be hiding up on that mountain. Yet other details in Lily's file painted a more complex picture. Dr. Samuel Reed, the town's only physician, reported that Emma Brennan had never missed a scheduled vaccination or checkup. Her medical records showed a healthy, well-cared-for child whose father was meticulous about her healthcare needs. The girl had never presented with injuries or signs of abuse, and her interactions with medical staff suggested a secure attachment to her father. The contradictions in the case intrigued Lily more than the usual clear-cut situations she encountered. Most of her interventions involved families where neglect or abuse was obvious, children who were malnourished, uneducated, or showing behavioral signs of trauma. Jack Brennan seemed to exist in a gray area where his choices appeared motivated by genuine care for his daughter, even if those choices raised questions about her socialization and educational opportunities. As her sedan climbed the final steep stretch toward the Brennan property, Lily reviewed her approach strategy. She had learned that mountain families responded better to directness than bureaucratic pleasantries. These were people who valued honesty, self-reliance, and practical solutions to problems. Her goal was to assess Emma's welfare without creating unnecessary conflict, assuming that Jack Brennan was simply an overprotective father who needed guidance about his daughter's educational and social needs. The cabin that came into view exceeded her expectations completely. Instead of the ramshackle structure she had anticipated, she found a well-built log home with a stone foundation, properly chinked walls, and a metal roof that gleamed in the morning sunlight. Solar panels angled toward the south suggested that while the family lived off-grid, they were not living in primitive conditions. A vegetable garden, neatly tended despite the late autumn season, stretched along the cabin's south side. Split firewood was stacked in impressive ricks under a covered shelter, enough to last through multiple harsh mountain winters. The property spoke of a man who understood mountain living and took pride in providing for his family. Every detail, from the carefully maintained trail leading to an outhouse to the sturdy chicken coop behind the cabin, suggested competence and forethought. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This was not the home of a neglectful father, but rather someone who had chosen a different way of life and possessed the skills to make it work. When Jack Brennan appeared in his doorway, Lily's preconceptions scattered like leaves in a mountain wind. The man commanded attention not through intimidation, but through a presence that suggested absolute confidence in his ability to handle whatever life might throw at him. His clothes were practical, worn jeans, a flannel shirt, and boots designed for serious outdoor work, but everything was clean and well-maintained. His beard was neatly trimmed, his hair pulled back in a way that kept it out of his eyes while working. Most striking were his hands, which told the story of a man who built his life through physical labor. These were not the soft hands of someone who had given up on responsibility, but the calloused, scarred hands of someone who could fix anything that broke, build anything his family needed, and defend anything he loved. Yet despite their obvious strength, Lily noticed how gently those hands rested at his sides, suggesting a man who understood the difference between power and violence. The silence stretched between them as Lily gathered her thoughts. In her 3 months of rural social work, she had encountered fathers who immediately went on the defensive, mothers who broke down in tears, and children who hid behind their parents when a government worker appeared at their door. Jack Brennan did none of these things. He simply waited, watching her with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance, her demeanor, and her intentions. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard the first time. "You're the social worker." It was not a question but a statement of fact, delivered without hostility or welcome. He had clearly been expecting this visit, which suggested either that someone in town had warned him or that he understood the natural consequences of withdrawing his daughter from school. Lily straightened her shoulders and adopted her most professional tone. "Mr. Brennan, I'm Lily Carter from Colorado Child Protective Services. I'm here to follow up on some concerns about Emma's educational situation and general welfare." She had learned to be direct about the purpose of her visits, avoiding the bureaucratic language that often escalated tensions with rural families. Jack's expression did not change, but something shifted in his posture that suggested he was assessing not just her words, but her character. "Emma's fine," he said simply. "She's getting a better education up here than she ever got down in town." His tone carried the conviction of someone who had thought deeply about his choices and was prepared to defend them. "I'm sure you believe that, Mr. Brennan, but the state requires certain standards for children's education and welfare. My job is to ensure that Emma is receiving appropriate care and learning opportunities. Lily kept her voice level, neither challenging nor condescending, hoping to establish a foundation for productive conversation. For the first time since she had arrived, Jack's expression showed a flicker of something that might have been amusement. Lady, Emma can track a deer through 2 miles of forest, identify every edible plant between here and Devil's Canyon, and read at a level that would put most high school students to shame. She knows more about real life at 7 years old than most adults learn in a lifetime. The pride in his voice when he spoke about his daughter was unmistakable, and Lily found herself reassessing her assumptions once again. This was not a man who had withdrawn his child from school out of laziness or indifference. His decision appeared to be based on a genuine belief that he could provide something better than what the conventional educational system offered. Those are valuable skills, Mr. Brennan, but Emma also needs exposure to other children, structured learning environments, and preparation for functioning in the broader world. Complete isolation can have serious developmental consequences for a child. Her age. Lily drew on her training, explaining the concerns that had brought her to his mountain. Jack was quiet for a long moment, his gaze shifting from Lily to the forest that surrounded his property. When he looked back at her, something in his eyes had changed, becoming more guarded. Emma's not isolated. She has everything she needs. Right here. And she's safer up here than she would be anywhere else. The emphasis he placed on safety caught Lily's attention. Most parents who withdrew their children from school cited educational concerns or religious reasons. Jack Brennan seemed to be motivated by something more primal, a father's instinct to protect his child from dangers that others might not even recognize. What makes you think she's safer here than in town? Lily asked, genuinely curious about his reasoning. Understanding a parent's motivations was often the key to finding solutions that protected children while respecting family autonomy. Jack's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The world's not getting safer, Miss Carter. Every day, there are new threats, new ways for children to get hurt or corrupted. Up here, I know what she's exposed to. I can control the environment, teach her what she needs to know, and make sure she grows up with the right values. His answer revealed the worldview of someone who had seen enough of life's darker possibilities to believe that withdrawal was the best form of protection. Lily had encountered this mindset before, usually in parents who had experienced trauma or loss that made them hypervigilant about their children's safety. It was not necessarily unhealthy, but it could become problematic if taken to extremes. I understand your desire to protect Emma, Mr. Brennan. Every parent wants to keep their child safe. But children also need opportunities to develop independence, social skills, and resilience. These things are harder to learn in complete isolation. Lily tried to find middle ground, acknowledging his concerns while gently challenging his approach. Before Jack could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of the person Lily had come to evaluate. Emma Brennan emerged from behind the cabin, carrying a bucket that was clearly heavy for her small frame. She was dressed in practical clothes similar to her father's, jeans, boots, and a jacket that looked designed for serious outdoor activity. Her long brown hair was braided in a way that kept it out of her face while working. What struck Lily immediately was the child's confidence. Emma moved with the sure-footed grace of someone completely comfortable in her environment, setting down the bucket with careful attention to not spilling its contents. When she noticed the stranger standing with her father, she did not hide or seem anxious. Instead, she approached with the same quiet assessment that characterized Jack's initial reaction. Emma, this is Ms. Carter. She's here to check on how you're doing. Jack's introduction was matter of fact, neither warning the child to be careful nor encouraging her to be friendly. He was letting his daughter form her own opinion about this visitor. Emma studied Lily with dark eyes that seemed far too serious for a 7-year-old. Are you here because I'm not in school anymore? She asked directly, displaying the same straightforward communication style as her father. Lily was struck by the child's maturity and self-possession. Most 7-year-olds would either be shy with strangers or eager to show off. Emma seemed to understand that this visit had serious implications and was responding accordingly. That's part of why I'm here, Emma. I want to make sure you're learning everything you need to know and that you're happy and healthy. I'm learning lots of things, Emma replied confidently. Today I'm helping Dad check the snares we set for rabbits. Yesterday, we studied the constellations and read 3 chapters of Little House on the Prairie. Tomorrow, we're going to practice using the radio to contact the ranger station in case of emergencies. The child's description of her daily activities painted a picture of education that was both practical and academic. Lily found herself impressed despite her reservations about the isolation. Emma was articulate, confident, and clearly receiving personalized attention that would be impossible in a traditional classroom setting. That sounds like you're learning a lot, Lily acknowledged. Do you ever miss being around other children? Playing with friends your age? Emma considered the question seriously before answering. Sometimes I think about my friends from school, but I like learning things that matter. At school, we mostly sat at desks and filled out worksheets. Here, everything I learn helps me understand how the world really works. Her response was clearly influenced by her father's perspective, but it was delivered with genuine conviction. Emma Brennan was not a child who felt deprived or isolated. She seemed to genuinely believe that her mountain education was superior to what she had received in town. Jack watched this exchange with the alert attention of a parent monitoring his child's interaction with a potential threat. Lily could sense his protectiveness, but also his pride in Emma's ability to articulate her thoughts and defend her way of life. This was clearly a child who had been encouraged to think independently and express her opinions confidently. The complexity of the situation was becoming clear to Lily. According to every metric she had been trained to use, Emma Brennan appeared to be thriving. She was healthy, well-educated in her own way, and seemed to have a secure relationship with her father. Yet she was also being raised in almost complete isolation from peers and conventional social structures. The long-term implications of this approach were difficult to predict. As the morning progressed and Lily continued her informal assessment, she found herself facing a professional dilemma that was becoming personal. Jack Brennan challenged every assumption she had made about mountain families who withdrew from mainstream society. He was clearly intelligent, capable, and devoted to his daughter's welfare. Emma was thriving under his care in ways that many children in traditional settings never experienced. Yet questions remained about the sustainability of this lifestyle and Emma's preparation for eventually rejoining the broader world. More troubling were the hints that Jack's protective instincts might be rooted in something deeper than general parental concern. His emphasis on safety and control suggested experiences that had convinced him the outside world posed specific threats to his daughter. Standing in the mountain sunshine, watching a father and daughter who had built a life of remarkable self-sufficiency, Lily Carter began to understand that this case would challenge not only her professional training, but her fundamental beliefs about what children needed to flourish. The man before her looked capable of handling any crisis the mountains might present, yet seemed to harbor fears about dangers that others might not even perceive. She had no way of knowing that within 48 hours, Jack Brennan would face a crisis that would strip away every defense he had built, leaving him more vulnerable than she could have imagined possible. The man who appeared so strong, so controlled, so utterly self-sufficient, would soon discover that some losses could break even the most determined father. And Lily Carter, who had never seen a man cry in all her years of social work, would witness the complete collapse of someone she was beginning to respect more than any parent she had ever encountered. 3 days later, Lily found herself driving back up Copper Mountain with a heavy heart and a briefcase full of documents that could destroy the Brennan family. Her supervisor, Margaret Thornton, had reviewed her initial assessment with the cold efficiency of someone who saw children as case numbers rather than human beings. The director of Child Protective Services had made her position crystal clear. Jack Brennan's isolation of his daughter violated state educational requirements and posed potential developmental risks that warranted immediate intervention. The legal papers in Lily's briefcase gave her the authority to remove Emma from the mountain and place her in emergency foster care, pending a full custody evaluation. Standard protocol demanded that she arrive with Sheriff Robert Hayes and at least one backup social worker to ensure the child's safe removal. But something about her first encounter with Jack and Emma had left Lily deeply uncomfortable with the standard approach. During her 3-month career in rural social services, she had witnessed the traumatic removal of children from families where abuse or neglect was obvious. Even in clear-cut cases where intervention was necessary, the process was devastating for everyone involved. Children who were genuinely unsafe often blamed themselves for the family's destruction, while parents who had failed their responsibilities still experienced the removal as a fundamental violation of their rights. But the Brennan case was different in ways that kept Lily awake at night. Emma was not being abused or neglected by any reasonable standard. She was receiving an unconventional education that appeared to be remarkably effective. Her relationship with her father was secure and loving. Her removal would serve the letter of state law while violating every principle of child welfare that had drawn Lily to social work in the first place. The moral complexity of the situation was compounded by Lily's growing suspicion that Jack Brennan's protective instincts were rooted in experiences that would justify his fears. During her initial visit, she had noticed details that suggested a man who understood violence and danger in ways that most parents never needed to consider. The way he positioned himself between Emma and any potential threat, his constant awareness of his surroundings, and his emphasis on teaching his daughter survival skills all pointed to someone whose caution was earned rather than paranoid. Yet her professional obligations were clear. Colorado state law required children to receive formal education either through public schools, accredited private institutions, or documented homeschooling programs that met specific criteria. Jack Brennan had not filed the necessary paperwork to establish a legal homeschooling program, nor had he demonstrated that Emma was receiving instruction equivalent to what she would receive in a traditional classroom. More concerning from a legal standpoint was Emma's almost complete isolation from peers and community institutions. While the child appeared to be thriving under her father's care, state guidelines emphasized the importance of socialization, exposure to diverse perspectives, and preparation for eventual integration into broader society. Jack's mountain-based education, however effective in its own terms, did not address these developmental needs. As her sedan struggled up the familiar dirt road, Lily wrestled with a decision that would define her career and possibly her conscience. She could follow protocol, arrive with law enforcement support, and remove Emma according to the legal authority granted by her paperwork. This approach would protect her professionally and ensure that she could not be accused of failing to enforce state requirements for child welfare. Alternatively, she could attempt to work with Jack Brennan to find a solution that protected Emma's interests while respecting the family's autonomy. This approach carried significant professional risks, particularly if her supervisor discovered that she had deviated from established procedures. But it also offered the possibility of achieving the best outcome for a child who was clearly loved and well cared for by her father. The cabin came into view just as storm clouds began gathering over the mountain peaks. November weather in Colorado was notoriously unpredictable, capable of shifting from mild autumn sunshine to dangerous blizzard conditions within hours. The approaching storm added urgency to Lily's mission, regardless of which approach she chose to take. Jack appeared in his doorway before her car came to a complete stop, his expression more guarded than during her previous visit. He had clearly been watching the road, expecting her return. His posture suggested a man prepared for confrontation, though he made no overtly threatening gestures. Emma was nowhere to be seen, which Lily interpreted as a sign that Jack anticipated trouble. When Lily stepped out of her car, she made a conscious decision that would alter the trajectory of both their lives. Instead of reaching for her briefcase with its legal documents and official authority, she kept her hands visible and empty. Her body language signaled that she was here for conversation rather than enforcement action. "Mr. Brennan," she began, her voice carrying none of the official formality she had been trained to use in confrontational situations. "I need to talk with you about Emma's situation. There are some serious concerns that we need to address." Jack's eyes flicked to her empty hands, then to her car where no law enforcement vehicle followed. His stance relaxed slightly, though he remained alert. "What kind of concerns?" he asked, his tone neutral but prepared for bad news. Lily took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would commit her to a course of action that violated every protocol she had been taught. "The state is prepared to remove Emma from your custody based on educational neglect and concerns about her isolation. I have the legal authority to take her today." The change in Jack's expression was immediate and profound. The confident mountain man who had impressed her with his competence and self-sufficiency vanished, replaced by a father confronting his worst nightmare. His hands clenched involuntarily. His breathing quickened, and for the first time since she had met him, Jack Brennan looked genuinely afraid. "You can't take her," he said, his voice rough with emotion he was struggling to control. "Emma belongs here. This is her home. I'm her father." The words came out with the desperation of someone who was discovering that his strength meant nothing against the power of institutional authority. Lily felt her heart break watching this transformation. The man who could clearly handle any physical threat the mountains might present was utterly helpless against the legal system that had given her the power to destroy his family. "I don't want to take her, Mr. Brennan. That's why I'm here alone, talking to you instead of showing up with deputies and a removal order." Hope flickered in Jack's eyes, quickly replaced by suspicion. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've spent the last 3 days trying to find a way to make this work that doesn't involve tearing your family apart. Emma is clearly thriving under your care, and removing her would traumatize both of you unnecessarily. But I need your help to make that happen." Jack studied her face, searching for deception or manipulation. His military background had taught him to read people quickly and accurately, skills that had served him well in civilian life. Whatever he saw in Lily's expression convinced him that she was being genuine. "What kind of help?" "The state requires documented proof that Emma is receiving an adequate education. That means formal curriculum plans, regular assessments, and evidence that she's meeting grade-level standards in core subjects. It also means some form of socialization with peers and exposure to community institutions." Jack's jaw tightened. "I'm not sending her back to that school. She learned more in 6 months up here than she did in 2 years down there. I'm not asking you to send her back to school, but we need to find ways to satisfy the state's requirements while keeping her here with you. That might mean bringing in a certified tutor for certain subjects, arranging playdates with other homeschooled children, or finding creative ways to document her learning." The conversation was interrupted by Emma's voice calling from inside the cabin. "Dad, is everything okay?" The concern in the child's voice was evident, and Jack's protective instincts immediately took precedence over his own fears. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Ms. Carter and I are just talking." Jack's voice, when addressing his daughter, was completely different from his tone with Lily, gentle and reassuring despite his own anxiety. "Can I come out?" Emma asked, and Jack nodded. The little girl emerged from the cabin with the same confident bearing Lily remembered from their first meeting, but she stayed close to her father's side. Looking at the two of them together, Lily was struck again by the strength of their bond. Emma clearly felt safe and secure with Jack, while he radiated protective devotion that was almost palpable. The idea of separating them felt not just wrong, but actively harmful to both. "Emma," Lily said gently, "your dad and I are talking about ways to make sure you can keep living here while also meeting some requirements the state has about children's education. Would you be willing to work with us on that?" Emma looked up at her father, reading his expression with the intuitive understanding that develops between family members who depend on each other completely. Whatever she saw there convinced her that this was important. "What would I have to do?" "Well, we might need to document some of the learning you're already doing, maybe work with a tutor on certain subjects, and possibly spend some time with other children your age. Nothing that would change your life here dramatically, but enough to satisfy the people who make the rules." Emma considered this seriously, displaying the same thoughtful approach to problems that characterized her father. "Would I still get to do my regular learning with Dad? The tracking and plant identification and star navigation?" "Absolutely," Lily assured her. "Those skills are incredibly valuable, and I would never want to interfere with that kind of education. We just need to add some traditional academic structure to complement what you're already learning." Jack listened to this exchange with growing appreciation for Lily's approach. She was treating Emma as an intelligent individual capable of participating in decisions about her own life, rather than as a passive recipient of adult choices. This respect for his daughter's autonomy aligned with his own parenting philosophy, and suggested that Lily understood things about children that many social workers missed. "What happens if we can't satisfy these requirements?" Jack asked, dreading the answer but needing to understand the stakes. Lily's expression grew somber. "Then the state will remove Emma and place her in foster care while conducting a full custody evaluation. The process typically takes 6 to 12 months, during which your parental rights would be suspended and Emma would live with strangers." The brutality of this possibility hit Jack like a physical blow. 6 months to a year of separation from his daughter, with no guarantee that they would be reunited even if he eventually satisfied the state's requirements. Emma would be traumatized by the separation, placed in an environment where her mountain skills would be useless and her father's teachings might even be discouraged. Dad, Emma's voice was small and worried, picking up on her father's distress despite his efforts to remain calm. Jack knelt down to her level, taking her hands in his calloused ones. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart. Ms. Carter is trying to help us figure out how to keep our family together while satisfying some rules that other people think are important." Emma nodded solemnly, then surprised both adults by addressing Lily directly. "My dad is the best teacher in the world. If you need proof that I'm learning, I can show you. I can read any book you bring me, solve math problems, and tell you about history and science and geography. My dad makes sure I understand everything, not just memorize it." The child's passionate defense of her father and her education brought tears to Lily's eyes. This was not a child who felt deprived or isolated. This was a child who felt loved, valued, and confident in her abilities. The idea that the state considered this situation problematic seemed absurd when confronted with Emma's obvious well-being. "I can see that your dad is an excellent teacher, Emma. The challenge is that the state has very specific requirements about how children must be educated, and we need to find ways to meet those requirements while preserving everything good about your life here." Jack stood slowly, his mind racing through possibilities and obstacles. The approaching storm was bringing more than just weather. It was bringing a deadline for decisions that would determine his family's future. "What exactly would we need to do?" he asked, his tone suggesting that he was prepared to consider options he would have rejected under normal circumstances. "First, we'd need to establish a formal homeschooling program with documented curriculum plans and regular assessments. I can help you navigate the paperwork and requirements. Second, we need to arrange for some form of social interaction with peers, whether through homeschool cooperatives, community activities, or structured playdates." Jack's reluctance was evident. Emma doesn't need other children to be happy or healthy. She has everything she needs right here. "I understand your perspective, Mr. Brennan, but the state's position is that children need exposure to diverse social situations to develop properly. It doesn't have to be traditional school, but it does need to be regular contact with peers." The wind was picking up, carrying the scent of snow and the promise of a serious storm. Jack glanced at the darkening sky, his mountain instincts reading weather patterns that city people missed entirely. "There's a blizzard coming. You need to get off this mountain before the roads become impassable." Lily followed his gaze, noting the rapid change in atmospheric conditions. She had learned to trust local knowledge about mountain weather during her brief time in rural Colorado. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 2 hours before it becomes dangerous. 3 at the outside." Jack's assessment was delivered with the confidence of someone whose survival had often depended on reading weather accurately. The approaching storm created an unexpected pressure that forced rapid decision-making. Lily could not afford to drive back down the mountain only to return later for a longer conversation. Whatever agreement they reached would have to be negotiated now, under the pressure of time and weather. "Mr. Brennan, I need a commitment from you today. Either we work together to satisfy the state's requirements, or I have to proceed with the removal order. I don't want to take Emma away from you, but I can't ignore my legal obligations indefinitely." The ultimatum hung between them like the gathering storm clouds. Jack looked at his daughter, seeing not just the child he loved, more than life itself, but the responsibility that defined his existence. Everything he had built on this mountain, every choice he had made since his wife's death, had been motivated by his determination to protect and provide for Emma. "If I agree to work with you," he said slowly, "what guarantee do I have that the state won't just keep adding requirements until you take her anyway?" It was a fair question that Lily could not answer with complete honesty. The bureaucratic system she represented was capable of shifting goalposts and imposing additional demands without warning. Her supervisor, Margaret Thornton, had already expressed skepticism about any arrangement that left Emma in the mountains. "I can't give you guarantees about what other people might decide," Lily admitted. "But I can promise that I'll fight for your family as hard as I can, and that I believe we can find a solution that works for everyone if you're willing to trust me." Trust. The word carried enormous weight for a man who had learned to rely only on himself and his own abilities. Jack Brennan had not trusted anyone outside his immediate family since his wife's death, and the idea of placing his daughter's welfare in the hands of a government employee violated every instinct he had developed. Yet looking at Lily Carter, he saw something that his military experience had taught him to recognize: genuine integrity under pressure. She could have arrived with law enforcement and simply taken Emma according to her legal authority. Instead, she had chosen to risk her own career by attempting to find a solution that preserved his family. "What would you need from me?" asked, the question representing a surrender that cost him more than physical pain ever could. Documentation of Emma's current education, agreement to follow a state-approved curriculum for core subjects, regular assessments to demonstrate her progress, and arrangements for social interaction with other children. "I can help you with all of it, but you have to be willing to work within the system rather than against it." Jack closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his wife's absence more acutely than he had in months. Sarah would have known how to handle this situation. She had been the diplomat in their marriage, the one who could navigate social complexities. That often escaped him. Without her guidance, he was forced to make decisions that felt like betrayals of everything he had tried to build for their daughter. "Dad." Emma's voice brought him back to the present moment. She was looking up at him with complete trust, confident that he would find a way to protect their life together. "All right," he said quietly, the words feeling like a defeat even as he recognized them as necessary for victory. "We'll try it your way." Relief flooded Lily's expression, followed immediately by determination. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan. I know this isn't easy for you, but I truly believe we can make this work." The first snowflakes began falling as they shook hands, sealing an agreement that neither of them fully trusted but both recognized as their only hope for keeping Emma where she belonged. Jack Brennan had just agreed to open his carefully protected world to outside scrutiny and influence, while Lily Carter had committed herself to defending a family against an institutional system that rarely showed flexibility or compassion. Neither of them could foresee that within 48 hours, their careful negotiations would become irrelevant in the face of a crisis that would test every assumption they had made about strength, protection, and the limits of human control. Over fate. The mountain that had provided Jack with security and isolation was about to demand a price that would challenge everything he believed about his ability to keep his daughter safe. The storm approaching Copper Mountain carried more than snow and wind. It carried the seeds of a tragedy that would strip away every defense Jack Brennan had built, leaving him more vulnerable than the toughest man in Pine Ridge had ever imagined possible. 2 weeks of careful cooperation had transformed the Brennan cabin into something resembling a formal educational environment. Lily made the treacherous drive up Copper Mountain 3 times each week, bringing curriculum materials, assessment tools, and her growing respect for a father and daughter who were working harder than any family she had ever encountered to satisfy the state's requirements. Jack had thrown himself into the documentation process with the same methodical precision he applied to every aspect of mountain living. His military background served him well as he created detailed lesson plans, learning objectives, and progress reports that exceeded what many certified teachers produced. Emma's natural intelligence and curiosity made the academic assessments a formality. She consistently performed above grade level in every subject area Lily tested. The most challenging requirement involved socialization with peers, a need that seemed almost impossible to satisfy given their remote location. Pine Ridge's small population included fewer than a dozen children Emma's age, most of whom lived in town and attended the public school that Jack had specifically rejected. The logistics of arranging regular contact with other children required creative solutions that pushed against every boundary Jack had established to protect his daughter. Their breakthrough came through Pastor David Wells, whose Mountain View Community Church served families scattered across the remote valleys surrounding Pine Ridge. The pastor had been quietly building a network of homeschooling families who gathered monthly for educational activities and social interaction. When Lily approached him about including Emma in these gatherings, Pastor Wells proved to be an unexpected ally who understood both Jack's protective instincts and the state's legitimate concerns about isolated children. The first homeschool cooperative meeting took place at the church on a crisp Saturday morning in early December. Jack had spent the previous night pacing his cabin, wrestling with anxieties that he could barely articulate. His daughter had been his constant companion for 6 months, never out of his sight for more than a few minutes at a time. The idea of leaving her with strangers, even in a supervised church environment, triggered protective instincts that bordered on panic. Emma sensed her father's distress despite his efforts to remain calm. As they drove down the mountain toward town, she reached over to touch his arm with the intuitive understanding that had developed between them since her mother's death. "Dad, you know I'll be careful, and you'll be right there if I need you." Jack's throat tightened at his daughter's attempt to comfort him. At 7 years old, Emma was already more emotionally mature than many adults, a development that filled him with pride and concern in equal measure. She should not have to reassure her father about routine social activities. Yet here she was, understanding his fears and responding with compassion that humbled him completely. The Mountain View Community Church occupied a modest building on Pine Ridge's main street, its white wooden walls and simple cross marking it as a place where practical faith took precedence over elaborate ceremony. Pastor Wells greeted them in the parking lot, his warm smile and genuine enthusiasm helping to ease some of Jack's visible tension. The pastor was a man in his 50s who had raised 4 children of his own and possessed the rare ability to put both parents and children at ease during stressful situations. Inside the church fellowship hall, Jack discovered a scene that challenged many of his assumptions about homeschooling families. Instead of the isolated, socially awkward children he had expected, he found a diverse group of kids who seemed confident, articulate, and genuinely excited about learning together. Their parents represented a range of backgrounds and motivations for choosing homeschooling, from religious convictions to educational philosophy to practical considerations about rural living. Emma integrated into the group activities with an ease that surprised her father. Her mountain education had given her knowledge and skills that impressed the other children, while her natural curiosity and friendly demeanor made her a welcome addition to their established social dynamics. Watching her interact with peers for the first time in months, Jack realized how much he had been projecting his own social anxieties onto his daughter. The cooperative structure impressed Lily, who observed the activities with professional interest. The children rotated through educational stations that covered everything from traditional academic subjects to practical life skills like basic first aid and outdoor safety. Parents with specialized knowledge led different sessions, creating a collaborative learning environment that combined the personalized attention of homeschooling with the diverse perspectives that came from group interaction. During a nature science session led by a local park ranger, Emma's extensive knowledge of mountain ecology made her an instant star among the other children. She could identify animal tracks that stumped older kids, explain the survival strategies of various plant species, and describe weather patterns with the confidence of someone who had learned these subjects through direct experience rather than textbook study. Jack watched his daughter share her knowledge with growing amazement. The isolation he had imposed to protect her had also hidden her remarkable abilities from potential friends and mentors who could appreciate and build upon what she had learned. For the first time since withdrawing Emma from public school, he began to question whether his protective instincts had been serving her best interests. The cooperative meeting concluded with a group project that required children to work in teams planning an imaginary camping expedition. Emma's practical knowledge of outdoor survival made her an invaluable team member, while her exposure to the other children's creative approaches to problem-solving expanded her thinking in ways that purely solitary learning could not achieve. As families prepared to leave, several parents approached Jack with genuine warmth and curiosity about his mountain lifestyle. Rather than the judgment or condescension he had expected, he encountered people who admired his self-sufficiency and were eager to learn from his experiences. One father, a former military officer who had moved to Colorado for similar reasons, invited Jack and Emma to visit his family's ranch for a future cooperative meeting. The drive back up Copper Mountain was filled with Emma's excited chatter about her new friends and the activities they had shared. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Jack found himself smiling more than he had in months. The social interaction that had seemed like a dangerous concession to bureaucratic requirements had proven to be genuinely beneficial for his daughter. Lily followed them up the mountain in her own vehicle, her professional satisfaction tempered by growing concern about the long-term sustainability of their arrangement. The homeschool cooperative satisfied the state's socialization requirements, and Jack's documentation efforts exceeded all expectations for academic rigor. Yet she could sense the strain that compliance was placing on a man who had structured his entire life around avoiding exactly this kind of external oversight and obligation. That evening, as snow began falling outside the cabin windows, the three of them sat around Jack's handmade kitchen table reviewing the day's events and planning the following week's lessons. The domestic scene felt natural and peaceful, yet Lily could not shake the feeling that they were living on borrowed time. Her supervisor had been asking pointed questions about the Brennan case, expressing skepticism about any arrangement that left Emma in such an isolated environment. Margaret Thornton represented the institutional mindset that valued compliance over outcomes, process over results. The director of Child Protective Services had built her career on strict adherence to state guidelines and viewed creative solutions as potential liabilities rather than innovative approaches to complex problems. Lily's flexibility in working with the Brennan family had already generated several pointed memos about proper procedures and appropriate boundaries between social workers and their clients. The pressure from above was complicated by reports from town residents who remained skeptical about Jack's fitness as a single father. Betty Morrison, the general store owner's wife, had made several calls to the state office expressing concerns about a child being raised in such isolation by a man with no apparent social connections or community ties. Her concerns were echoed by other townspeople who viewed Jack's reclusiveness as inherently suspicious. Sheriff Robert Hayes occupied a middle position in the community's divided opinion about the Brennan family. The lawman had served Pine Ridge for over 20 years and prided himself on knowing every family in his jurisdiction. Jack's arrival 7 years earlier had challenged his preference for open communication and community integration, but the sheriff had found no evidence of criminal activity or child endangerment during his occasional welfare checks. The sheriff's law enforcement experience had taught him to distinguish between genuine threats and situations that simply made people uncomfortable. Jack Brennan fell into the latter category, a man whose lifestyle choices were unconventional, but not inherently dangerous. Yet Hayes also understood the political pressures that social services faced and the potential consequences if something went wrong with a case that had already generated community attention. The delicate balance that Lily had negotiated between Jack's autonomy and state requirements became increasingly precarious as December progressed. Emma's academic progress was undeniable. Her social development through the homeschool cooperative was proceeding well, and her relationship with her father remained strong and healthy. By every measure that mattered for child welfare, the arrangement was succeeding beyond expectations. However, the institutional machinery of child protection operated according to different criteria than individual outcomes. Margaret Thornton's concerns focused on precedent and liability rather than Emma's actual well-being. Allowing Jack Brennan to maintain custody while living in such isolation could encourage other parents to withdraw their children from proper oversight. The case had the potential to establish precedents that could complicate future child protection efforts across the state. The bureaucratic pressure intensified when a state-level review of rural child protection cases flagged the Brennan situation for additional scrutiny. Colorado's Department of Human Services had been criticized in several high-profile cases where inadequate oversight had allowed child abuse to continue undetected. The political sensitivity around these failures made officials extremely cautious about any arrangement that deviated from standard procedures. Lily found herself caught between competing loyalties and obligations that seemed impossible to reconcile. Her professional training emphasized the importance of following established procedures designed to protect children from harm. Yet her direct experience with the Brennan family convinced her that rigid application of those procedures would harm rather than help the child they were meant to protect. The moral complexity of her situation was compounded by her growing personal investment in Jack and Emma's welfare. Professional boundaries were supposed to prevent social workers from becoming emotionally involved with their clients. Yet Lily had never encountered a family that challenged her assumptions about parenting, education, and child welfare so completely. Jack's competence as a father was evident in every aspect of Emma's development. The child was confident, intelligent, emotionally secure, and remarkably mature for her age. Her mountain education had given her knowledge and skills that far exceeded what most children learned in traditional settings. Her relationship with her father was characterized by mutual respect, open communication, and genuine affection. Yet, the isolation that enabled this remarkable educational and emotional development also created vulnerabilities that the state's guidelines were designed to prevent. Emma had no regular contact with mandated reporters who might detect signs of abuse or neglect. Her education, however effective, was not subject to the oversight and standardization that protected other children from educational gaps or bias. Most troubling was the question of what would happen to Emma if something happened to Jack. The mountain lifestyle that provided such rich learning opportunities also exposed them to risks that urban families never faced. Weather emergencies, medical crises, or accidents could leave Emma completely dependent on her father's survival skills and judgment. These concerns weighed heavily on Lily's mind as she continued her weekly visits to the Brennan cabin. Each trip up the mountain felt like a potential farewell, as she never knew when her supervisor might lose patience with the unconventional arrangement and demand immediate compliance with standard removal procedures. The approaching Christmas season added another layer of complexity to an already delicate situation. Emma had been looking forward to participating in the homeschool cooperative's holiday celebration, her first real Christmas party with peers since leaving public school. Jack had been working with local craftsmen to create handmade gifts that reflected his daughter's interests and their shared love of mountain living. Yet the holiday season also brought increased scrutiny from community members who had strong opinions about proper family structures and child-rearing practices. The annual Christmas pageant at Mountain View Community Church would put Emma and Jack in the spotlight of community attention, potentially generating new complaints to social services about their unconventional lifestyle. Sheriff Hayes had already fielded several calls from concerned citizens who questioned whether it was appropriate for such an isolated child to participate in community events. Some callers expressed genuine concern about Emma's social adjustment, while others seemed motivated by discomfort with Jack's refusal to integrate into Pine Ridge's social fabric. The sheriff found himself in the uncomfortable position of defending a man he barely knew against accusations he could not entirely dismiss. Jack Brennan's reclusiveness made it difficult to assess his character or motivations through normal community interactions. His military background suggested discipline and responsibility, but it also raised questions about potential trauma or instability that might affect his parenting abilities. The institutional pressure reached a breaking point when Margaret Thornton announced her intention to conduct a surprise inspection of the Brennan household. The director's official justification focused on routine case review procedures, but Lily understood that her supervisor was looking for evidence to justify removing Emma from her father's custody. The surprise inspection was scheduled for the week before Christmas, timing that seemed designed to maximize stress and disruption for the family. Lily was given minimal advance notice and was instructed to accompany her supervisor during the visit to provide continuity and professional insight. The prospect of Margaret Thornton's inspection filled Lily with dread that went beyond professional concerns. Her supervisor represented everything that was wrong with the institutional approach to child protection: rigid adherence to procedures regardless of outcomes, suspicion of any arrangement that deviated from standard practice, and a fundamental distrust of parents who made unconventional choices. Worse, Lily knew that Margaret Thornton had already made up her mind about the Brennan case. The director viewed Jack's isolation and Emma's unconventional education as inherently problematic, regardless of how well the child was actually doing. The inspection would be conducted not to assess Emma's welfare objectively, but to gather evidence supporting a predetermined conclusion about the need for intervention. The timing of the inspection also created practical challenges that could be used to justify negative assessments. December weather in the Colorado mountains was notoriously unpredictable, capable of making the drive to the Brennan cabin dangerous or impossible on short notice. If weather conditions prevented the inspection from proceeding as scheduled, Margaret Thornton could use the access difficulties as evidence that Emma was too isolated for proper oversight. Even if the inspection proceeded smoothly, the stress of unexpected official scrutiny could easily disrupt the peaceful routine that Jack and Emma had established. A 7-year-old child confronted by stern officials questioning her living situation would naturally be confused and upset, reactions that could be interpreted as signs of insecurity or fear regardless of their actual cause. Jack's reaction to official pressure was equally problematic from an institutional perspective. His military background had taught him to respond to authority with either compliance or resistance, leaving little room for the diplomatic cooperation that social services preferred. If he became defensive or confrontational during the inspection, his behavior could be used as evidence of instability or poor judgment. As the date for Margaret Thornton's inspection approached, Lily found herself hoping for a massive blizzard that would make travel to the Brennan cabin impossible. The weather that had initially seemed like a minor complication in her work with the family now represented their best hope for avoiding a confrontation that could destroy everything they had built together. The irony was not lost on her that she was hoping for the same isolation and inaccessibility that her supervisor viewed as problematic. The mountain conditions that made regular oversight difficult also protected Jack and Emma from the kind of bureaucratic interference that served institutional interests rather than the child's actual welfare. Yet, even as she hoped for weather to delay the inevitable confrontation, Lily knew that temporary reprieve would not resolve the fundamental tensions between Jack's determination to protect his daughter through isolation and the state's insistence on oversight and standardization. The fragile peace they had constructed was built on compromises that satisfied neither side completely, making it vulnerable to pressure from any direction. The approaching inspection represented more than just a bureaucratic review. It was a test of whether love and competence could prevail against institutional power and rigid procedure. Jack Brennan had spent 6 months proving that his unconventional approach to parenting produced remarkable results. But those results might not matter if they could not be documented and defended according to the state's requirements. Emma's welfare hung in the balance between her father's fierce protectiveness and a system that equated protection with control. The mountain that had provided them with security and independence was about to become the stage for a confrontation that would determine whether they could continue to live according to their own values or would be forced to conform to standards that neither understood nor respected. The blizzard struck 3 days before Margaret Thornton's scheduled inspection, transforming Copper Mountain into an impenetrable fortress of snow and wind. What began as light flurries quickly escalated into a full-scale winter storm that dumped 4 feet of snow across the high country and made travel impossible for anyone without serious mountain experience. The weather that Lily had secretly hoped for arrived with a vengeance that exceeded even her most optimistic expectations. Jack had been tracking the storm's approach for days, reading atmospheric pressure changes and wind patterns with the expertise of someone whose survival often depended on accurate weather prediction. His military training in mountain warfare had taught him to recognize the signs of serious weather systems long before they became obvious to casual observers. By Tuesday evening, he was already securing loose equipment and preparing the cabin for an extended period of isolation. Emma watched her father's preparations with the calm interest of a child who had learned to trust his judgment completely. She helped him bring extra firewood inside, check their food supplies, and ensure that their emergency communication equipment was functioning properly. The approaching storm held no terror for her. It simply represented another challenge that she and her father would face together with competence and preparation. The blizzard's timing created an unexpected reprieve from bureaucratic pressure, but it also exposed the family to dangers that no amount of documentation or compliance could address. Mountain storms were deadly serious events that could trap families for weeks, cut off communication with the outside world, and create emergencies that tested even the most experienced mountain dwellers. The isolation that Jack had chosen to protect his daughter from social threats now placed them both at the mercy of natural forces that recognized no human authority. Lily spent Wednesday morning attempting to contact the Brennan cabin by radio, following emergency communication protocols that Jack had established during their cooperation period. His voice came through clearly despite the static caused by the storm, reporting that he and Emma were secure and well supplied for an extended period of isolation. The competence in his tone reassured her that they were handling the emergency with characteristic efficiency. Margaret Thornton's reaction to the weather delay was predictably frustrated. The director had cleared her schedule for the inspection and was unwilling to accept natural obstacles as legitimate reasons for postponement. Her phone calls to Lily throughout Wednesday reflected increasing irritation with what she viewed as convenient excuses rather than genuine safety concerns. Mountain families choose to live in these conditions, Thornton argued during one particularly heated conversation. If they can't maintain access for legitimate state oversight, perhaps that's evidence that the living situation is inherently unsuitable for children. The logic was bureaucratically sound, but practically absurd. Colorado's mountain communities had always dealt with winter weather that periodically cut them off from the outside world. Emergency services, mail delivery, and routine government functions all operated according to seasonal realities that made regular access impossible during severe weather events. To suggest that weather inaccessibility constituted child endangerment would effectively criminalize mountain living for thousands of families. Yet Lily recognized that her supervisor's frustration reflected broader institutional pressures that went beyond individual cases. The Department of Human Services was under political scrutiny for several recent failures in child protection, creating an environment where officials were reluctant to show any flexibility that might be interpreted as negligence. Margaret Thornton's rigid approach to the Brennan case was motivated partly by genuine concern for Emma's welfare and partly by career self-preservation in an increasingly risk-averse bureaucratic culture. The storm continued through Thursday with undiminished intensity, adding another foot of snow to an already impossible travel situation. Sheriff Hayes reported that several county roads were completely impassable and that even emergency vehicles with chains and four-wheel drive were unable to reach many mountain communities. The idea of conducting a social services inspection under these conditions was not just impractical, but potentially dangerous for everyone involved. By Friday morning, the weather had begun to clear, revealing a transformed landscape that looked more like Arctic wilderness than the familiar Colorado mountains. Snow drifts reached the eaves of buildings in town, while mountain roads disappeared entirely under smooth white surfaces that betrayed no hint of the underlying terrain. The beauty of the winter scene was matched by its obvious danger for anyone attempting to travel through it. Jack's radio check-ins continued on schedule, reporting that he and Emma were comfortable and secure despite the extreme conditions. His updates included detailed weather observations that demonstrated professional-level understanding of mountain meteorology. He described wind patterns, temperature fluctuations, and snow density measurements with the precision of someone who had received formal training in alpine survival. These radio communications inadvertently revealed aspects of Jack's background that added new dimensions to Lily's understanding of his character and capabilities. His meteorological knowledge suggested formal military training beyond basic infantry skills. His communication protocols followed procedures that indicated experience with isolated operations where radio contact was a critical survival tool. Most significantly, his comm competence during a dangerous weather emergency demonstrated exactly the kind of preparation and skill that made his mountain lifestyle sustainable rather than reckless. During one Friday evening radio contact, Emma's voice joined her father's report, describing their activities during the storm with obvious enthusiasm. She had been continuing her academic work using books and materials that Jack had stockpiled for exactly this type of situation. She had also been learning advanced survival skills, including snow cave construction, emergency signaling, and cold weather physiology. The child's excitement about learning these skills highlighted one of the fundamental differences between her mountain education and what she would receive in a conventional setting. While town children were watching television or playing video games during the storm, Emma was acquiring knowledge that could literally save her life in emergencies. Her father was teaching her to see challenges as learning opportunities rather than obstacles to endure passively. Lily found herself increasingly impressed by the depth and breadth of Emma's education under her father's guidance. The child was not just learning traditional academic subjects, but was developing practical intelligence, emotional resilience, and problem-solving skills that would serve her throughout life. The isolation that concerned state officials was actually enabling a level of personalized education that few children ever experienced. The revelation of Jack's advanced survival skills and meteorological knowledge prompted Lily to conduct her own investigation into his military background. Her initial research had revealed basic service information, but had not explored the specific nature of his training or deployment history. Using her professional access to federal databases, she began piecing together a more complete picture of the man whose parenting abilities she had been asked to evaluate. What she discovered fundamentally changed her understanding of both Jack's motivations and his qualifications as a father. His military records revealed service with an elite mountain warfare unit that specialized in extended operations in extreme environments. He had completed advanced training in survival, communications, and small unit tactics that made him one of the most qualified mountain residents in Colorado. More significantly, his deployment history included multiple tours in Afghanistan's mountainous regions, where he had been responsible for the safety and welfare of other soldiers in conditions far more dangerous than anything Colorado could present. His commendations included several awards for leadership under fire and for actions that had saved the lives of his fellow soldiers. The records also revealed the source of Jack's protective instincts and his distrust of conventional institutions. His final deployment had ended when his unit was ambushed due to intelligence failures that cost the lives of 3 soldiers under his command. The after-action report cleared Jack of any responsibility for the tragedy, but his discharge paperwork indicated treatment for post-traumatic stress related to survivor guilt and loss of faith in institutional decision-making. This background information provided crucial context for understanding Jack's parenting philosophy and his resistance to outside oversight. His military experience had taught him that institutional incompetence could have deadly consequences for the people he was responsible to protect. His withdrawal to the mountains was not motivated by antisocial tendencies or criminal intent, but by a rational assessment that he could better protect his daughter by controlling her environment completely. The timing of Emma's withdrawal from school 6 months earlier also made more sense in light of this information. The spring semester had coincided with increased media coverage of school violence incidents across the country, events that would have triggered Jack's trauma responses and reinforced his belief that conventional institutions could not guarantee his daughter's safety. Lily's growing understanding of Jack's background created both professional admiration and personal concern. His qualifications as a protector and educator were far superior to those of most parents. Yet his trauma history raised questions about whether his protective instincts might be influenced by psychological factors that could affect his judgment. The line between reasonable caution and traumatic hypervigilance was not always clear, even to trained professionals. The discovery of Jack's military background also explained his exceptional relationship with Emma and her remarkable emotional maturity. Combat veterans who became fathers often developed intensely protective bonds with their children, viewing parenthood as a sacred trust that justified any sacrifice. Jack's devotion to Emma was not just love, but a sense of mission that gave meaning to experiences that had left him questioning his faith in everything else. These insights made the state's intervention in the Brennan family even more problematic from Lily's perspective. Jack was not an inadequate parent who needed guidance about child welfare. He was a highly qualified protector whose methods differed from conventional approaches, but were based on extensive training and experience. The bureaucratic procedures that Margaret Thornton wanted to impose would not improve Emma's safety or education, but would instead undermine the expertise that made her mountain life both possible and beneficial. By Saturday, the storm had passed completely, leaving behind conditions that would require several days of road clearing before normal travel was possible. The delay in the scheduled inspection gave Lily time to review her findings about Jack's background and consider how this information might affect the case's outcome. Her professional obligations required her to share relevant information with her supervisor, but she also needed to consider how that information might be interpreted and used. Margaret Thornton's institutional mindset would likely view Jack's combat trauma as a liability rather than understanding how his military training qualified him as an exceptional parent. The director's risk-averse approach to child protection would focus on potential psychological issues rather than recognizing the competence and dedication that Jack had demonstrated consistently. Revealing his military background might actually harm rather than help his case if presented without proper context. The ethical dilemma Lily faced reflected broader tensions within the child protection system between individual assessment and institutional liability. Her direct experience with the Brennan family convinced her that Emma was receiving exceptional care from a father whose qualifications exceeded those of most parents. Yet the system she represented was designed to identify risk factors rather than recognize exceptional competence, making it structurally biased against unconventional but effective parenting approaches. Sheriff Hayes contacted Lily Saturday evening with information that added another layer of complexity to the situation. His department had received a report from a hiker who claimed to have observed suspicious activity near the Brennan property several weeks earlier. The hiker described seeing a man and child engaged in what appeared to be military-style training exercises, including the use of what might have been weapons. The report was vague and possibly unreliable, coming from someone who admitted to trespassing on private property and who had no relevant expertise for interpreting what he had observed. However, any mention of weapons in connection with a child protection case was required to be investigated thoroughly, regardless of the source's credibility. The timing of the report, coming just as road access was becoming possible again, seemed designed to create maximum pressure for immediate intervention. Lily suspected that the hiker's report was connected to the community tensions that had been building around the Brennan case. Several town residents had expressed frustration with what they viewed as special treatment for a family that refused to integrate into local social structures. The timing and vague nature of the accusations suggested someone was attempting to force a confrontation that would justify removing Emma from her father's custody. The weapons allegation created an immediate crisis that could not be ignored or postponed regardless of weather conditions or bureaucratic preferences. Federal law required investigation of any report suggesting that children were being exposed to inappropriate weapons training or potential violence. The seriousness of the allegation meant that law enforcement would need to be involved in any follow-up investigation, fundamentally changing the nature of future contacts with the Brennan family. Sheriff Hayes was clearly uncomfortable with the situation, recognizing that the allegation was probably motivated by community prejudices rather than genuine safety concerns. His years of law enforcement experience had taught him to distinguish between credible threats and malicious reports designed to harass unpopular residents. However, his professional obligations required him to investigate any allegation involving children and potential weapons, regardless of his personal assessment of its credibility. The sheriff's conversation with Lily revealed his own growing respect for Jack Brennan's competence and character. Despite his initial reservations about the mountain man's reclusiveness, Hayes had observed nothing during his welfare checks that suggested instability or poor judgment. Jack's radio communications during the blizzard had demonstrated exactly the kind of responsible preparation that law enforcement hoped to see from residents in isolated areas. More significantly, the sheriff had conducted his own discreet investigation into Jack's background and had reached conclusions similar to Lily's about his military qualifications and trauma history. Hayes understood that combat veterans often struggled with reintegration into civilian society and that many found peace through isolation and self-reliance rather than through conventional social engagement. The weapons allegation forced all parties to confront the fundamental question of whether Jack's military background made him more or less qualified as a parent. His combat experience had certainly exposed him to violence and trauma that most parents never faced, potentially creating psychological issues that could affect his judgment. However, that same experience had also given him protective skills and situational awareness that made him uniquely qualified to keep his daughter safe in a dangerous world. Sunday morning brought clear skies and the beginning of serious road-clearing efforts that would soon make travel to the Brennan cabin possible again. The approaching end of their weather-imposed isolation meant that all the tensions and pressures that had been building around the case would soon come to a head. Margaret Thornton was demanding immediate access for her inspection. The sheriff needed to investigate the weapons allegation, and the community was watching to see whether the state would finally take action against the Mountain family that had defied conventional expectations. Lily spent Sunday afternoon preparing for what she knew would be the decisive confrontation in the Brennan case. Her professional obligation required her to accompany her supervisor during the inspection and to assist with the investigation of the weapons allegation. However, her personal conviction was that Jack and Emma represented everything that was right about strong families, and that the institutional response represented everything that was wrong with bureaucratic approaches to human problems. The approaching confrontation would test not only Jack's ability to defend his family, but also Lily's willingness to stand up for what she believed was right despite the professional risks. The fragile cooperation that had sustained their arrangement for 2 months was about to be tested by forces that viewed compromise as weakness and unconventional success as institutional failure. As the sun set over the snow-covered mountains Sunday evening, 3 different groups prepared for a confrontation that would determine Emma's future and test the limits of parental authority versus state power. Jack Brennan prepared to defend everything he loved against a system he no longer trusted. Margaret Thornton prepared to enforce institutional authority against a family that had defied proper oversight for too long. And Lily Carter prepared to choose between professional security and moral conviction in a way that would define her career and her character. The mountain that had provided sanctuary for a father and daughter seeking peace and safety was about to become the battleground for a conflict that would reveal the true character of everyone involved. The man who had never been seen to cry was about to face tests that would challenge every assumption about strength, protection, and the price of love. Emma Brennan disappeared during the early morning hours of Monday, December 18th, while helping her father check the snares they had set for winter game. The routine that had provided structure and security for their mountain life became the context for every parent's worst nightmare when a simple outdoor task transformed into a life-threatening emergency that would test every skill Jack had learned as a soldier and every bond he had built as a father. The morning had begun with the clear, cold beauty that followed major winter storms in the Colorado mountains. Jack and Emma had awakened to brilliant sunshine on deep snow, conditions that demanded both respect and preparation, but that also offered opportunities for the kind of outdoor education that was central to their lifestyle. The snare line was a 2-mile circuit through the forest that provided fresh meat while teaching Emma practical lessons about animal behavior, forest ecology, and survival skills. They had checked the first 3 snares without incident, finding one rabbit that would provide several meals and observing fresh deer tracks that Emma identified correctly without prompting from her father. Her woodcraft skills had developed remarkably during their months of isolation, making her a genuinely useful partner in activities that combined practical necessity with educational value. The 4th snare was located near Copper Creek, where a small bridge crossed the stream about half a mile from their cabin. The creek ran swift and deep even in winter, fed by underground springs that kept it from freezing completely despite sub-zero temperatures. Jack had chosen the location because game animals used the bridge crossing regularly, making it an effective place for snares while also providing Emma with lessons about animal behavior and habitat selection. Emma had been walking slightly ahead of her father, following the established trail with the confidence of someone completely familiar with her environment. Her winter boots provided good traction on the packed snow, and her small pack contained emergency supplies that Jack insisted she carry whenever they left the immediate vicinity of the cabin. Everything about the morning reflected the careful preparation and safety-conscious approach that characterized all of their outdoor activities. The creek crossing that morning presented conditions that were more challenging than usual due to the recent storm. While the bridge itself was sound, the approaches were covered with fresh snow that concealed potentially icy surfaces beneath. Jack had been preparing to test the footing before allowing Emma to cross when the sound of approaching helicopters broke the mountain silence. 2 aircraft appeared from the direction of Pine Ridge, flying low and fast in a way that immediately triggered Jack's military training. The helicopters were not following normal flight patterns for routine travel or emergency services. Their approach suggested a coordinated operation designed to achieve surprise, the kind of tactical arrival that Jack associated with military or law enforcement missions. The sight of official aircraft approaching his sanctuary triggered psychological responses that Jack had spent years trying to manage. His combat experience had conditioned him to interpret helicopter sounds as potential threats, associations that rational analysis could not entirely overcome. The PTSD that he had worked so hard to control through isolation and routine suddenly flared with an intensity that made clear thinking difficult. Emma sensed her father's distress immediately, turning back from the bridge with concern written across her young face. She had learned to recognize the signs when Jack's military experiences intruded on their peaceful mountain life, and she responded with the compassionate maturity that had developed through their years together. Her father's protection had always been absolute and reliable. Now she faced the unfamiliar situation of seeing him genuinely frightened. The helicopters landed in the clearing near their cabin, disgorging a combined force of law enforcement officers, child protective services personnel, and federal agents whose presence suggested that the weapons allegation had escalated far beyond local jurisdiction. Margaret Thornton had clearly decided to approach the case with overwhelming force rather than diplomatic negotiation, bringing sufficient personnel to handle any resistance that Jack might offer. Jack's military training told him that retreat was the only tactical option available when facing superior numbers in an untenable position. His parental instincts told him that these people represented an existential threat to his family that justified any action necessary for protection. The conflict between rational assessment and emotional response created a state of psychological chaos that made effective decision-making nearly impossible. Emma watched her father struggle with internal demons that she could not understand, but recognized as dangerous. The man who had always been her source of strength and security was experiencing a crisis that left her feeling more alone and vulnerable than she had ever been. Yet her training in mountain survival gave her resources that most 7-year-olds would not have possessed in a similar emergency. The creek crossing that had seemed routine minutes earlier now represented a potential escape route from the approaching threat. Emma's knowledge of the local terrain included several hiding places where she could wait safely while her father dealt with whatever crisis the helicopters represented. Her understanding of their emergency protocols told her to seek concealment and await further instructions rather than remain exposed in the open. Jack's awareness of the tactical situation was overwhelmed by his psychological response to the helicopter sounds and his recognition that Emma was in immediate danger from forces he could not control. His protective instincts, enhanced by combat, training, and parental devotion, demanded action to remove his daughter from the threat zone regardless of the personal consequences. The decision to send Emma across the bridge was made in seconds under conditions that allowed no time for careful consideration of alternatives. Jack's assessment was that she would be safer on the far side of the creek, away from the immediate area where armed personnel were deploying. His plan was to follow her after conducting a brief reconnaissance to determine the exact nature and intentions of the approaching force. Emma understood her father's urgency and moved quickly toward the bridge, following instructions that were consistent with emergency procedures they had practiced but had never needed to implement. Her confidence in Jack's judgment was absolute, and she trusted that his assessment of the situation was correct even though she could not see the full picture herself. The bridge crossing that morning proved to be more treacherous than either of them had anticipated. The fresh snow had concealed a layer of ice formed by the stream's spray during the recent storm, creating surface conditions that were nearly impossible to detect until weight was applied. Emma's careful steps were not sufficient to prevent the disaster that followed when the hidden ice gave way beneath her feet. The fall into Copper Creek happened so quickly that neither Emma nor Jack had time to react effectively. One moment, she was walking carefully across the familiar bridge. The next moment, she was struggling in water so cold that it numbed her extremities within seconds. The current, swollen by snowmelt and spring flow, immediately swept her downstream toward Devil's Canyon and the dangerous rapids that lay beyond. Jack's response was immediate and desperate, his parental instincts overriding every other consideration, including his own safety. He plunged into the creek without hesitation, fighting the current and the shock of the freezing water in an attempt to reach his daughter before she was carried beyond help. His military training in water survival gave him techniques for managing the cold and the current, but the conditions were severe enough to challenge even his exceptional skills. The sound of Emma's voice calling for help as the current swept her away was a sound that Jack would never forget for as long as he lived. It was the cry of the person he loved most in the world facing mortal danger that he might not be able to prevent. Every protective instinct, every parental bond, every reason he had for living was concentrated in that desperate sound echoing across the mountain wilderness. The water was cold enough to cause rapid hypothermia in anyone exposed to it for more than a few minutes. Emma's small body would succumb to the temperature much more quickly than an adult. giving Jack only a brief window of opportunity to effect a rescue before the cold water made survival impossible. The urgency of the situation demanded speed and precision that were difficult to achieve under such extreme conditions. Jack's pursuit took him nearly a mile downstream, fighting the current and the cold while trying to maintain visual contact with Emma's small form in the churning water. His daughter's winter clothing provided some protection against the cold, but also made swimming more difficult, creating a balance between thermal protection and mobility that could determine the difference between survival and tragedy. The creek bed was familiar territory to Jack, who had explored every mile of its course during their years on the mountain. His knowledge of the terrain told him that Emma's only chance lay in reaching one of several deep pools where the current slowed enough to allow swimming rather than simply being swept along helplessly. His challenge was to intercept her trajectory before she reached the rapids that marked the beginning of Devil's Canyon. The physical demands of the rescue attempt pushed Jack's capabilities to their absolute limits. The cold water was sapping his strength and coordination at a rate that made each passing minute critical. His military training had prepared him for extreme conditions, but nothing had prepared him for the emotional trauma of watching his child struggle for survival while being unable to guarantee her safety. Emma's own survival training proved crucial during the ordeal. Jack had taught her to remain calm in emergencies, to conserve energy when possible, and to look for opportunities to help herself rather than waiting passively for rescue. Her knowledge of the creek's course told her to angle toward the bank whenever possible and to grab any opportunity for handholds that might slow her progress downstream. The rescue, when it finally came, was achieved through a combination of Jack's determination, Emma's preparation, and the kind of luck that seemed to favor those who had done everything possible to prepare for disaster. Jack managed to intercept Emma's path at a bend in the creek where fallen trees created a natural dam that slowed the current enough for him to reach her. The physical contact between father and daughter in the icy water was a moment of relief, so intense that it nearly overwhelmed Jack's ability to continue functioning. Emma was conscious and responsive, her training having served her well during the ordeal. However, both of them were experiencing the early stages of hypothermia and needed immediate treatment to prevent more serious complications. The trek back to their cabin with Emma in his arms was a journey that tested every aspect of Jack's physical and mental conditioning. His daughter's safety depended entirely on his ability to maintain forward progress despite exhaustion, cold, and the psychological trauma of nearly losing the person who meant everything to him. Each step was an act of will that drew on reserves of strength that he had not known he possessed. The cabin, when they finally reached it, represented safety and warmth that seemed almost miraculous after their ordeal in the creek. Jack's emergency preparations proved their worth as he implemented cold water rescue protocols that he had hoped never to need. Hot water, dry clothes, and warm shelter began the process of treating hypothermia that could have been fatal under different circumstances. Emma's recovery was faster than Jack's, her youth and smaller body mass allowing her to rewarm more quickly once removed from the cold water. Her resilience amazed her father, who had expected the trauma of the experience to leave her shaken for days or weeks. Instead, she seemed to view the incident as another learning experience, asking questions about hypothermia treatment and cold water survival that demonstrated her analytical approach to emergency situations. Jack's own recovery was complicated by the psychological impact of nearly losing his daughter to an accident that had occurred while he was trying to protect her from human threats. The irony that his attempt to keep Emma safe from law enforcement had exposed her to natural dangers that were far more deadly was not lost on him. His protective strategies had failed when they were needed most, leaving him questioning everything he thought he knew about keeping his child safe. The helicopter teams that had triggered the emergency were long gone by the time Jack and Emma returned to their cabin. The law enforcement personnel had discovered an empty house and no sign of the weapons that had been reported by the anonymous hiker. Margaret Thornton's inspection had proceeded without the family she had come to evaluate, leaving her with no evidence to support either removal or continued oversight. Lily arrived at the cabin that evening, having driven up the mountain as soon as the roads were clear enough for travel. Her concern for Jack and Emma had overcome her professional caution about making unauthorized visits, and she needed to see for herself that they had survived whatever had happened during the official visit. The sight that greeted her challenged every assumption she had made about strength, vulnerability, and the price of love. Jack Brennan sat in his handmade kitchen chair, holding his sleeping daughter with a tenderness that seemed to encompass every protective instinct a father could possess. His eyes were red with exhaustion and emotion, his face marked by the kind of raw vulnerability that came from confronting the possibility of ultimate loss. For the first time since she had known him, the mountain man who had seemed invulnerable was openly weeping. The tears that ran down Jack's weathered cheeks were not signs of weakness, but evidence of love so profound that it transcended every defense he had built around his emotions. The man who had never been seen to cry was discovering that some experiences broke through every barrier that training and experience could construct. Nearly losing Emma had stripped away every pretense and revealed the bedrock truth that his daughter's life was more precious to him than his own existence. Lily stood in the doorway, witnessing a moment of raw humanity that redefined her understanding of strength and parenthood. The father who held his rescued child was not the stoic mountain man she had first encountered, but a human being whose capacity for love made him more vulnerable than any amount of military training could compensate for. His tears were not a sign of failure, but evidence of the profound success he had achieved in loving his daughter completely. The crisis had revealed truths about the Brennan family that no amount of bureaucratic evaluation could have uncovered. Jack's protective instincts were not rooted in paranoia or antisocial tendencies, but in love so deep that it justified any sacrifice. Emma's resilience was not just the product of mountain training, but of security so complete that she could face danger with confidence in her father's ability to save her. The institutional forces that had gathered to evaluate and potentially separate this family had witnessed instead a demonstration of bonds that transcended every conventional measure of family success. The love between Jack and Emma was not just adequate by bureaucratic standards. It was extraordinary by any measure that recognized the transformative power of unconditional devotion. Margaret Thornton's inspection had failed to find evidence of the problems she had expected to document. Instead, it had created a crisis that demonstrated exactly why Jack Brennan was not just an adequate father, but an exceptional one. His willingness to risk everything to save his daughter, combined with the preparation and training that made the rescue possible, proved that Emma was safer with him than she would be in any conventional setting. The aftermath of the creek incident marked the beginning of a new chapter in the Brennan family's relationship with the outside world. The bureaucratic pressures that had threatened to tear them apart were overwhelmed by evidence of competence and love that could not be dismissed or regulated. Jack's tears had washed away the pretense that his family needed fixing, revealing instead the profound success he had achieved in creating a life built on mutual devotion and shared strength. In the days that followed, the community of Pine Ridge began to understand what Lily had recognized from the beginning: that Jack Brennan was not a problem to be solved, but a father to be respected. His unconventional methods had produced extraordinary results, and his love for Emma was evidenced not just in words, but in actions that demonstrated the lengths to which he would go to protect her. The man who had never been seen to cry had revealed the source of his strength in the depths of his vulnerability. His tears were not defeat, but victory, not weakness, but evidence of love so powerful that it could overcome any obstacle. Emma's safety and happiness were not accidents, but the products of a father's devotion that recognized no limits and accepted no compromises. The mountain that had provided sanctuary for their family remained their home, but it was no longer a refuge from the world. Instead, it became a place where the world could see what was possible when love was allowed to flourish without interference from those who confused conformity with competence. Jack and Emma Brennan had proven that families built on genuine devotion could thrive even in the face of institutional pressure designed to force them into conventional molds. The creek that had nearly claimed Emma's life became a symbol of both danger and salvation, reminding all who knew their story that love's greatest tests often came from unexpected directions. Jack's willingness to risk everything to save his daughter had proven that his protective instincts were not paranoid but prophetic, based on understanding that genuine threats could emerge from any source at any time. As winter settled over, Copper Mountain. The Brennan family found peace not in isolation, but in the recognition that their love had been tested and proven strong enough to survive any challenge. Jack's tears had watered the ground where their future would grow, fed by devotion that had been refined in the crucible of nearly losing everything that mattered. The morning sun cast long shadows across the freshly fallen snow as Lily Carter made her familiar drive up Copper Mountain. December 18th had arrived again, marking the first anniversary of the day that had transformed not only the Brennan family, but the entire approach to child welfare in Pine Ridge and the surrounding mountain communities. The cabin that came into view was both exactly the same and completely transformed. The structure itself remained unchanged, but new additions told the story of a family that had grown beyond survival into prosperity and influence. A satellite dish provided internet access while maintaining mountain independence. Most significantly, a new building housed what had become known as the Mountain Skills Academy, Jack's contribution to a revolution in outdoor education. The sound of laughter drew Lily's attention to the clearing behind the cabin, where Emma, now 8 years old and radiating confidence, was leading a group of 6 other children through a winter survival exercise. Her student assistants ranged in age from 6 to 12, children from homeschooling families throughout the region who gathered monthly for what parents had begun calling Brennan training. Jack observed from a respectful distance, ready to intervene if safety required, but clearly comfortable allowing Emma to take the lead. His transformation was as remarkable as his daughter's growth. The psychological crisis that had accompanied Emma's near drowning had forced Jack to confront trauma he had been managing through isolation rather than truly processing. Dr. Amanda Richardson, a trauma specialist from Denver, had begun making regular trips to the mountain after Sheriff Hayes quietly arranged for her services. The therapeutic relationship had developed slowly, but Emma's obvious thriving had provided motivation that eventually overcame Jack's resistance to outside help. The therapy sessions revealed that Jack's protective strategies had been shaped by survivor guilt and hypervigilance that, while understandable, had been limiting both his healing and Emma's social development. The creek incident demonstrated that isolation could not protect his daughter from every danger and that his attempts to control every aspect of her environment might actually reduce her ability to handle unexpected challenges. The breakthrough came when Dr. Richardson helped Jack understand that his military training could be an asset rather than a liability in civilian parenting, provided it was balanced with community connections. His expertise in survival, leadership, and crisis management were valuable gifts he could share rather than hoard for Emma's exclusive benefit. The Mountain Skills Academy had grown from this realization, beginning as informal weekend gatherings where Jack shared outdoor skills with other homeschooling families and evolving into a structured program that attracted participants from across Colorado. Parents brought their children to learn everything from basic wilderness safety to advanced survival techniques, while participating in community-building activities that transformed Jack from an isolated mountain man into a respected community leader. Emma's role in the academy reflected her father's influence, while demonstrating social confidence developed through regular peer interaction. She had become a natural teacher, combining extensive practical knowledge with intuitive understanding of how to communicate complex skills to younger children. Her ability to explain tracking techniques to a 6-year-old or demonstrate fire building to teenagers showed that her mountain education had produced not just competence, but wisdom. The academic component of Emma's education had also evolved, far beyond basic state compliance measures. Her participation in virtual learning communities connected her with gifted programs that challenged her intellect, while maintaining the hands-on approach that characterized her mountain schooling. University researchers had begun incorporating her observations about mountain ecology into their studies, recognizing that her daily experience provided insights laboratory research could not duplicate. Sheriff Hayes had become an unexpected advocate for the Brennan family's approach. His initial skepticism about Jack's isolation had been replaced by admiration for the practical skills and leadership qualities the mountain man brought to regional emergency preparedness efforts. Jack's military experience and mountain expertise had proved invaluable during several search and rescue operations. Margaret Thornton's departure from the Department of Human Services had removed the primary institutional obstacle to creative solutions. Her replacement, Director Patricia Caldwell brought rural social work background that made her more sympathetic to mountain family challenges. The new director had worked with Lily to develop policies recognizing the validity of alternative educational approaches while maintaining appropriate child welfare oversight. Lily's own career had been transformed by her advocacy for the Brennan family. Her promotion to Regional Director of Rural Family Services gave her authority to implement policy changes she had fought for at the case level. Her success with the Brennan family had become a model for other social workers dealing with unconventional but functional family situations. The anniversary gathering that brought Lily to the mountain was both celebration and recognition ceremony. The Colorado Department of Human Services was formally acknowledging the Mountain Skills Academy as an approved educational institution, giving Jack's teaching official recognition and protecting other families pursuing similar approaches. Emma emerged from the group of children to greet Lily with confident warmth. "Ms. Lily, Dad's inside making hot chocolate for everyone. He wanted me to bring you in as soon as you arrived." Jack appeared from the kitchen carrying steaming mugs, his appearance as transformed as everything else about their mountain life. The guarded tension that had once characterized his interactions with outsiders had been replaced by genuine warmth and confidence. "Lily," he said, setting down the tray to embrace her with easy family affection. "I was hoping you'd arrive before the ceremony. Emma has been practicing her speech all week." The formal ceremony took place in the Academy building, with representatives from the Department of Human Services, law enforcement, educational institutions, and community organizations gathered to witness official recognition of Jack's teaching program. Director Patricia Caldwell presented the certification establishing the Mountain Skills Academy as a recognized educational institution. Sheriff Hayes spoke about emergency preparedness benefits resulting from Jack's training programs. Pastor Wells offered reflections on the spiritual dimensions of outdoor education and character development. Emma's speech was the emotional highlight, her clear voice and thoughtful words demonstrating communication skills and self-confidence developed through her unique educational experience. She spoke about learning practical skills that built real competence, the value of close family relationships, and the joy of teaching others skills that could help them throughout their lives. As the formal festivities concluded, Lily found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment of celebration. The crisis that had seemed likely to destroy the Brennan family had instead become the catalyst for transformation benefiting not only Jack and Emma, but an entire community seeking alternatives to conventional education approaches. The tears Jack had shed after nearly losing Emma had watered seeds of healing and growth that produced fruit beyond anything any of them could have imagined. His willingness to vulnerability had opened doors to community connection and professional recognition that transformed isolation into leadership and protection into service. That evening, families gathered around a bonfire behind the cabin, sharing stories and enjoying multi-generational fellowship that had become a hallmark of their mountain community. Jack stood watching Emma help younger children roast marshmallows, while older kids shared adventure stories from their outdoor expeditions. Lily joined him in observing the activities, both understanding they were witnessing something special that had grown from their willingness to trust each other during difficult times. "She's remarkable," Lily said, watching Emma demonstrate fire safety to fascinated 6-year-olds. "Everything you hoped she would become and more." Jack nodded, his expression reflecting pride tempered by humility that came from nearly losing everything that mattered. "She teaches me as much as I teach her these days. Probably more." As families departed and snow began falling gently, Emma made her rounds saying goodbye with easy social grace. Inside the warm cabin, Jack and Emma settled into their evening routine, their conversation focusing on memories of the difficult year that had brought them to this moment of recognition. "Do you think things would have been different if Ms. Lily hadn't been willing to work with us instead of just following the rules?" Emma asked. Jack considered seriously. "I think we were all lucky to find each other when we did." She needed to see that families could succeed in unconventional ways, and we needed to learn that accepting help didn't mean giving up our independence. As the anniversary passed into memory and a new year stretched ahead, the Brennan family faced the future with confidence built on genuine achievement and community support. The mountain that had once provided refuge had become a platform for sharing gifts and knowledge that benefited families throughout the region. The man who had never been seen to cry had learned that tears could be evidence of love rather than weakness, that vulnerability could create strength rather than destroying it, and that genuine protection came from building competence rather than controlling circumstances. Their story had become proof that families built on genuine devotion could not only survive institutional pressure, but could transform it into opportunities for growth and service. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.